Hi everyone, my name is Howie Freefall Man Hansen. I'm a skydiver, retired firefighter, and a part-time blender head. The video I got for you today is on taking a camera and flying it through a scene, focusing it on various objects. The number of objects in this particular scene today is going to be 6. I was not able to find a video on how to do this with any objects more than 2. So after figuring it out, I figured I would post this because maybe it'll help somebody. This video assumes a few things. It assumes that you have some basic knowledge of Blender, like how to use a camera, how to make camera paths, and how to use the video playback features, okay? I'm not an expert on this. If there's anyone that knows a better way, let me know. All right, that's it for now. Let's get started. All right, my fellow Blender heads, let's quit monkeying around and get started here. All right, the first thing that we want to do is we want to turn on our automatic keyframing. That's right here above our timeline. All right, if it's grayed out, it is off. We want to click on it and then we'll see that red circle. Then the auto keyframing is on. All right, for the scene that I'm doing here, I have 6 Susan heads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I have them numbered S1 through S6. At this point, I want to make sure that my camera is selected, all right, and that I am under my constraints tab right here. Then I have to add a track 2 constraint for each one of my objects. That means that I need 6 of them. So I'm going to come here to my Add Object Constraint bar. I'm going to click on that. Then you'll see the track 2 constraint down here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right. Then I'm going to rename them to make it everything easier to keep track of. The first track 2, I'm going to name T1. Second T2. Down the line. And lastly, T6. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up to my T1 constraint. I'm going to grab my eyedropper by clicking on it, left click. Then I'm going to click on my S1 object with the dropper. That snaps my camera to my first object. All right. If you see the influence that the track 2 constraint has over the camera, it's at 1. That's 100%. If I left click and drag this to the left and lessen the influence, you'll see that the camera does not stay on the object. That's not what I want. So let's bring it back up to 1. And I'm going to click on this white dot right here. And that will keyframe that first object. Then I'm going to hit my space bar to start moving my camera along the path here. And I can move that to wherever I want. We'll say frame 60 looks good to me, at which point I'm going to come back to my T1 constraint and make sure that it's still on 0, and then I'm going to click on this hollow diamond. That puts another keyframe here at frame 60 on my timeline. Now I'm going to use my right arrow on my keyboard to move to frame 61 right here, and then I'm going to take the influence of my T1 object all the way down to 0 because I want to start focusing on my next object, which is my my S2 object. Using my track 2 constraint, I'm going to grab the track 2 dropper and click on my S2 object. That snaps the camera to that object, at which point I'm going to hit my space bar, move the camera to wherever I want. We'll say frame 130 here on the timeline, at which point I'm going to come back to my T2 constraint and look at my influence and click on my white dot. Then I'm going to use my right arrow key to move to frame 131, at which point I'm going to take my T2 influence down to 0. That automatically keyframed. Then I'm going to go to my T3 constraint, grab the eyedropper and click on my S3 object. That snaps the camera there. and then I'm going to hit my space bar, move the camera along. I think we'll go to, let's say, frame 230, at which point I'll go to my T3 constraint, make sure it's still on 1, click on the white dot. I'll click the right arrow on my keyboard to move to frame 231, at which point I will take my T3 influence down to 0. It automatically keyframes. I'm going to come to my T4 eyedropper, click on that, and go to my S4 object and click on that. That snaps the camera to my S4 object, at which point I will hit my spacebar, start moving my camera along. And let's see, we'll go to frame 335, and then I'll come back to my T4 constraint. I want it at 1, which it's at. I click on the white dot. Then I'm going to use my right arrow to move to my 336th frame, at which point I'll take my T4 constraint down to 0. It automatically keyframes with the diamond turning solid there. I'm going to go to my T5 constraint, grab the eyedropper, and I'm going to click on my S5 object. That snaps the camera to that object. I will hit my spacebar to move my camera along its path until, let's say, frame 415, at which point I will click on the white dot by the influence for my T5 constraint. And then I will use my right arrow key to move my timeline to my frame to 416 on my timeline, at which point I will take my T5 influence down to 0. It automatically keyframes because the diamond turns solid. I'll grab my T6 eyedropper and I will click on my S6 object. That snaps the camera to my S6 object. At this point, I will hit my spacebar and I will move my camera to the end of my timeline here, which for this animation is at 490. At this point, I will click on the T6 influence and keyframe it. Okay, so I've done all my steps that I need to do, but when I hit my spacebar to replay the animation, the camera is going to be locked on my 6th monkey head here. So I have to basically go through all my objects again and readjust the track 2 constraints, and then it will stay where it's supposed to stay. The camera, that is, it will stay aimed where it's supposed to stay aimed. Okay, so I'm going to hit my space bar to begin the animation, and I'll just stop it, and you can see that the camera is locked on the last monkey, the purple monkey head, which is S6. Okay, I'm just going to use my left key, or my left arrow rather, on my keyboard to move back to the first frame right here on my timeline. And now you'll see that my T6, T5, T4, T3, T2, they're all moved up to 1, and they should all be at 0. The only one that I want at 1 is my T1 constraint. So I'm going to go start at my T6 and take that down to 0, T5, T4, T3, T2, and then I'm just left with my T1 constraint at 1. All right, I'm going to hit my space bar till I come to my next keyframe here at frame 60 on my timeline, at which point I want my T1 constraint to be at 1, which it is, but everything after that I want at 0. T2, T3, T4, T5, and T6. Okay. I'm going to use my right arrow key to move to frame 61 on my timeline, at which point my T1 constraint goes down to 0, and I want my T2 constraint to be at 1. Automatically keyframes, and then everything after that, T3, 4, 5, and 6, I want to take them down to 0. Then I'll hit my space bar till I get to frame 130 on my timeline, at which point I'm going to take T6 down to 0, T5, T4, T3, and T2 should be at 1, which it is. I'm going to use my right arrow key to move to frame 131, at which point my T2 constraint goes down to 0, and I want my T3 constraint to be up to 100%. And then once I drag it there, you see it automatically keyframes. I want every constraint after T3, so T4 down to 0, T5, and T6, I want them all down to 0. I will hit my spacebar to begin the camera movement again. And I will stop at frame 230, at which point every influence, T6, T5, T4 should all be down to 0, and T3 is the only one that I want at 1. I'll use my right arrow key to move to frame 231, at which point my T3 constraint goes down to 0, and I want my T4 constraint to be up to 100%, so I'm going to drag that, left click and drag to the right, and then it automatically keyframes. I want to make sure everything after that is at 0. Then I'll hit my space bar till I get to frame 335, and I'll make sure that my T6 is down to 0 and my T5 and all my influence is on T4. I'll use my right arrow key to move to frame 336, which will take my T4 influence down to 0, which is what I want. Then I want my T5 to have 100% influence, so I'm going to left click, drag that to the right to 1, and it automatically keyframes. I want to make sure that my T6, which is my only one left after the 5, I want to make sure that that's down to 0. Then I'll hit my space bar till I get to frame 415, at which point I'm going to make sure my T6 has 0 influence and all the influence is on T5. Now I'm going to use my right arrow key to move to frame 416, which will take my T5 influence down to 0, and I want my T6 influence to be up to 1, and it automatically keyframes. Now when I hit my space bar, I'm going to go to the last frame of the animation, which is 490, and I want my T6 influence to be at 1, and everything underneath that should be at 0. Now when I hit my spacebar and play the animation, it'll work properly. There's S1, S2, S3, S4, S5, and S6. All right, so there you have it. I hope that was helpful. I will have links in the description that will take you to some YouTube videos that were helpful for me on how to, fly the camera around, how to create a path for it to follow, and how to use your timeline. All right. Thanks for watching.